The young cashier's hands wouldn't stop shaking as she reached for the lock at closing time, and the single dad was still standing in aisle 3. He should have left 10 minutes ago, should have been home with his daughter by now, but she'd asked him to stay with a desperation he recognized too well. Her voice had cracked when she said it. They're coming back tonight. They always come back. The store felt too bright, too exposed, every window a frame for whatever was waiting in the parking lot darkness. He was just a regular customer, someone who came in twice a week for groceries, a quiet man with tired eyes and a scar on his left arm that told stories he never shared. But tonight, as she locked the front door and killed the neon open sign, he became the only barrier between a terrified girl and the thugs who'd been terrorizing her for 4 straight nights. The silence stretched between them like a held breath. And then, at 10:15 exactly, headlights swept across the glass storefront, and 3 men stepped out of a truck, laughing like they owned the night. What those men didn't know, couldn't know, was that the quiet stranger still inside had once been one of them, and he'd spent 20 years trying to forget how much damage hands like his could do. Michael Grant stood near the back of Wilson's corner store with a gallon of milk in one hand and a sense of dread building in his chest. It was 9:45 on a Tuesday night, in the kind of neighborhood where streetlights flickered more than they shone, and sirens were just background noise. He'd been coming to this store twice a week for the past 3 months, ever since he and his daughter Claire moved into the apartment 6 blocks away. Always the same routine: milk, bread, sometimes eggs. Pay cash. Exchange maybe 3 words with whoever was working. Leave. But tonight was different. Tonight, the girl behind the counter looked like she might shatter if someone breathed too hard in her direction. Her name tag said Lily, and Michael had seen her working the evening shift before, usually with her phone propped against the register, watching something to pass the time. Tonight, her phone sat face down and forgotten. Tonight, her eyes kept darting to the glass doors at the front of the store, like she was watching for something specific, something bad. Michael had been around long enough to recognize that kind of fear. It had a texture to it, a weight that pressed down on a person's shoulders and made every small sound feel like a threat. He'd seen it in mirrors 20 years ago when he was the kind of man mothers warned their daughters about, when his knuckles were always split and his pockets were always full of money that didn't belong to him, when the name Michael Grant meant something different in the bars and back alleys of East Portland. Back then they'd called him Kane, just Kane. One word that made grown men step aside. He'd left that life behind when Claire was born. Left it so completely that sometimes he could almost convince himself it had happened to someone else. Almost. But the scar on his forearm and the way his hand still knew how to make fists told a different story. Some things you could walk away from. Some things walked with you. Lily rang up his items with trembling fingers, scanning the milk 3 times before the barcode finally registered. "Sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry, I just—" She trailed off, glancing at the door again. Outside, the parking lot was empty except for 2 cars. His truck and what he assumed was her beat-up sedan near the back entrance. "You okay?" Michael asked, though he already knew the answer. The question was more about whether she'd tell him the truth. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for a second, he saw her measuring something, weighing risk against risk, danger against danger. "There's these guys," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "They've been coming by, after closing, the last 4 nights. She pressed her lips together like she'd already said too much. Michael felt something cold settle in his stomach. What did they want? At first they just knocked on the glass, yelled things. Last night they— She stopped, swallowed hard. "Last night they tried the back door. I called the cops, but by the time they got here, the guys were gone. The officer said there wasn't much they could do unless something actually happened. He told me to call if they came back." She laughed. but there was no humor in it. Like I'm supposed to wait until something actually happens. The fluorescent lights above them buzzed, that persistent electrical hum that made every convenience store feel slightly unreal. Michael looked at this girl who couldn't have been more than 23 and saw someone else. Saw another face, another night, another time when he'd made the wrong choice. When he'd walked away from someone who needed help because getting involved wasn't smart, wasn't safe, wasn't his problem. He'd found out 3 days later that the girl had died, beaten to death behind a bar by men who thought they could do whatever they wanted because no one would stop them. Her name had been Sarah. She'd been 19, and Michael had carried her face in his head for 2 decades, a ghost that showed up in every reflective surface when he wasn't expecting it. "What time do they usually show up?" he asked. Lily blinked, surprised by the question. "Around 10:15, right after I lock up and turn off the front lights. That's when they know I'm alone." She paused, then added, "You should go. I shouldn't have said anything. It's not your problem." But it was, in a way she couldn't understand. It had been his problem since the night he walked away from Sarah, since the night he decided that saving himself was more important than being the kind of man who stood between monsters and their victims. He'd gotten a second chance when Claire was born, a chance to be better, to be the kind of father who taught his daughter that the world had people in it who would do the right thing even when it cost them something. "I'll stay," Michael said. The words came out before he could think them through, before the smart part of his brain could remind him about Claire waiting at home, about the life he'd built, about all the very good reasons to walk out that door right now. "Just until you lock up. Make sure nothing happens." Lily stared at him like he'd just offered to fly her to the moon. "You don't have to do that. I mean, I barely know you. You just come in here for milk and stuff. It's not—" She stopped, something shifting behind her eyes. Gratitude warring with fear, warring with desperate hope. "They're not good guys. I don't want you to get hurt because of me." Michael almost laughed at that, at the idea that 3 punks looking to terrorize a young girl could hurt him worse than he'd already hurt himself over the years. "I'll stay in the back," he said. "They won't even know I'm here. But if they try anything, you won't be alone, that's all." He could see her calculating it, weighing the risk of trusting a stranger against the certainty of facing those men by herself again. Whatever she saw in his face must have tipped the scales, because she nodded, just once, quick and sharp. "Okay, thank you. Thank you." Michael paid for his groceries and walked toward the back of the store, past the refrigerated section and the sad-looking produce display. He set his bag down near the storage room door, where he'd have a clear view of the front, but where he wouldn't be visible from outside. Then he pulled out his phone and texted Claire. "Going to be late. Lock the door. Love you." She sent back a thumbs-up emoji and a reminder about her history test tomorrow. 16 years old, and still somehow the most responsible person he knew. The next 20 minutes crawled by like hours. Lily moved through her closing routine with mechanical precision, counting the register, bagging the trash, wiping down the counters. But her movements were wrong, too quick and jerky, and she kept checking the clock on the wall like it was a countdown timer on a bomb. 9:55, 9:58, 10 o'clock. She locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. The overhead lights dimmed as she switched them to night mode, leaving just the security lights and the faint glow from the refrigerator cases. The store transformed into a different place in that half-darkness. More shadow than substance, more feeling than fact. Michael watched from his position near the back. His heart rate had slowed to that steady combat rhythm he remembered from his old life. The rhythm that meant violence was coming, and his body was getting ready for it. He'd thought he'd forgotten this feeling. Turned out some things were just dormant, waiting. At 10:12, Lily's phone buzzed. She looked at it and went pale, her whole body going rigid. Michael was about to ask what was wrong when he heard it. The sound of an engine, too loud and too aggressive, pulling into the parking lot. Headlights swept across the store windows, and Lily made a sound in her throat like a trapped animal. 3 men got out of a pickup truck that looked like it had survived multiple apocalypses. They moved with the casual arrogance of people who'd never faced real consequences, who thought intimidation was the same as power. The one in front was tall and lean, with a shaved head and tattoos crawling up his neck. He walked right up to the glass door and cupped his hands against it, peering inside. "Lily," he called out, his voice muffled but audible. "We know you're in there, sweetheart. Come on out. We just want to talk." The other 2 laughed, a sound that made Michael's hands curl into fists. One of them kicked the door. Not hard enough to break it, but hard enough to make the glass rattle in its frame. "Don't be rude, Lily. It's not nice to ignore your friends." Michael watched Lily frozen behind the counter, her phone clutched in both hands. She'd dialed 911. He could see her finger hovering over the call button, but she wasn't pressing it. She was too scared, too locked up in her own terror to move. The tall one tried the door handle, found it locked, and smiled. It was the worst kind of smile, the kind that said locked doors were just a minor inconvenience. "You know what?" he said to his friends. "I think she's playing hard to get. Maybe we should go around back. Check that employee entrance she likes so much." They started walking toward the side of the building, and that was when Michael moved. He crossed the store in long strides, coming up beside Lily so suddenly that she jumped. "Call the police," he said quietly. "Tell them there's a break-in in progress. Tell them to hurry." "They won't get here in time," Lily whispered, but her thumb was already pressing the button. "I know," Michael said. He walked to the front door and stood there, visible now through the glass. Visible and waiting. It took maybe 30 seconds for the 3 men to realize the back door wasn't going to be as easy as they thought. They came back around front, and that's when they saw him. The tall one stopped mid-stride, confusion flickering across his face. "Who the hell are you?" Michael didn't answer. He just stood there, hands loose at his sides, and met the man's eyes through the glass. There was a language to violence that men like this understood. A communication that happened without words. It was in the way you held yourself, the way you didn't blink, the way you made it clear that you'd done this before and you weren't afraid to do it again. The tall one saw something in Michael's stance that made him hesitate, made him take a step back and reassess. "This isn't your business, old man," he said, but there was less confidence in his voice now. "Walk away." "Can't do that," Michael replied, his voice carrying through the glass. Calm. Flat. Final. One of the other men, shorter and stockier with a face that looked like it had been on the wrong end of a few fights, pushed forward. "The hell you can't. You got about 3 seconds to turn around before this gets ugly for you." Michael had played this scene 100 times in his old life. He knew how it went. Knew that men like this pushed until they met real resistance, and then they usually backed down. Usually. But there was always a chance, always a moment where things could tip from posturing into actual violence, and you had to be ready for that moment, because it came fast and it came hard. "Lily," Michael said without turning around, "when I open this door, you get in that storage room, and you stay there. You understand?" "Don't," she said, her voice shaking. "Please don't. They'll hurt you." "They'll try," Michael said. Then he unlocked the door and stepped outside. The air was cooler out here, carrying the smell of old asphalt and exhaust. The 3 men spread out slightly, a semicircle, the way people did when they were getting ready to jump someone. Michael had been on both sides of this formation. He knew the angles, knew who would come first and from where. The stocky one was wound tightest, practically vibrating with the need to throw a punch. He'd be first. The tall leader would try to circle behind. The third guy hanging back and looking uncertain, probably wouldn't fight at all unless things went badly. Those were the ones you had to watch. The uncertain ones sometimes panicked and did stupid things with weapons. "Last chance," the tall one said. "This doesn't concern you." "It does now," Michael replied. He'd positioned himself so his back wasn't completely to the store, so he could see all three of them and the door behind him. "You're not going to bother that girl anymore. Not tonight. Not ever. Walk away." The stocky one laughed, sharp and mean. "You got some balls, I'll give you that. But you picked the wrong fight, Grandpa. We're going to—" He didn't get to finish because that's when he lunged. Michael had been watching his feet, watching the way his weight shifted forward, and he was already moving when the punch came. He slipped it easily, more muscle memory than conscious thought, and drove his elbow into the man's ribs hard enough to fold him in half. The stocky man went down with a wheeze, and Michael turned to face the other two. The tall one's eyes had gone wide. "You're Kane," he said, and it wasn't a question. "Holy shit, you're Michael Kane." Michael's blood went cold. That name. That goddamn name he'd spent 20 years burying. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," the tall one said. But he was backing up now, putting distance between them. "My brother ran with the East Side crew back in the day. He told me about you. Said you were the craziest son of a bitch he ever met. Said you put 3 guys in the hospital over a card game." The memory surfaced before Michael could stop it. A dingy room above a bar, cards and cash scattered across a table, the sound of bones breaking. He pushed it back down, locked it away. "That was a long time ago. I'm not that person anymore." "Yeah." The tall one gestured at his friend still curled up on the ground. "Looks pretty similar to me." The third man, the uncertain one, had his hand in his jacket pocket. Michael tracked the movement, calculating distances and timing. If the kid pulled a weapon, this whole situation would spiral into something none of them could take back. "Don't," Michael said, his voice cutting through the night. "Don't make this worse than it already is." The kid's hand stayed in his pocket, but he didn't pull it out. They all stood there in a frozen tableau, violence hovering in the air like humidity before a storm. Inside the store, through the glass, Michael could see Lily on the phone, her face white and terrified. "Here's what's going to happen," Michael said. He kept his voice level, reasonable, like he was discussing the weather instead of negotiating a truce with men who wanted to hurt someone. "You're going to pick up your friend, you're going to get in your truck, and you're going to drive away. If you ever come back here, if you ever bother that girl again, I'll know. And we'll have a very different conversation." The tall one stared at him for a long moment. Michael could see him doing the math, weighing pride against common sense, reputation against reality. Finally, he nodded. "Yeah. Okay. We're done here." He helped the stocky man to his feet, and together they started walking toward the truck. The uncertain one followed, glancing back at Michael like he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. They were almost to the truck when the stocky one spun around. He had something in his hand, something that caught the parking lot lights and gleamed. A knife. "Screw this," he snarled and charged. Michael saw it coming, but not fast enough. The knife slashed across his forearm, opening a line of fire from elbow to wrist. He grabbed the man's wrist on the backswing and twisted, using momentum and leverage to slam him face first into the ground. The knife skittered away across the asphalt. Michael knelt on the man's back, keeping him pinned, and looked up at the other two. "Get him out of here," Michael said through gritted teeth. Blood was running down his arm, dripping onto the concrete, but he didn't let go. "Now." The tall one looked like he wanted to argue, wanted to do something to save face, but sirens were wailing in the distance now, getting closer. He cursed under his breath and dragged his friend away from Michael. They piled into the truck and peeled out of the parking lot in a spray of gravel and exhaust fumes, leaving Michael kneeling on the ground with his arm on fire and his past standing beside him like an old friend he'd tried to forget. Lily burst out of the store, still holding her phone. "Oh my God, you're bleeding. Oh my God." She crouched beside him, her hands hovering over his arm like she wanted to help but didn't know how. "The police are almost here. I told them you were hurt." Michael stood up slowly, testing his weight. Everything worked, nothing broken. Just the arm, and he'd had worse. Much worse. "I'm fine," he said, but his voice sounded strange in his own ears. Distant. He looked down at the blood on his arm, at the parking lot where 3 men had just tried to hurt someone, at the girl next to him, who was shaking with adrenaline and relief, and he felt something crack open inside him, some wall he'd built between who he was and who he'd been. "You're not fine," Lily said. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "You saved me. Those men, they were going to... and you just..." She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't get the words past the emotion clogging her throat. The police arrived in a wash of red and blue lights. 2 officers got out of their car, hands on their weapons until they assessed the situation. One of them recognized the description Lily had given of the 3 men. Apparently, they'd been terrorizing other businesses in the area, escalating over the past few weeks. The officer took Michael's statement while a paramedic wrapped his arm, butterfly bandages holding together a wound that probably should have had stitches, but that Michael didn't want to deal with at a hospital. They asked if he wanted to press charges for assault. Michael said no. They asked if he could identify the men. Michael gave vague descriptions that could have matched 1,000 different people. The officers didn't push it. They'd seen enough to know that sometimes civilians got involved in situations that were better left simple, better left in the past. By the time they finished with paperwork and statements and questions, it was almost midnight. Lily's manager had shown up, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, who kept thanking Michael and apologizing to Lily and promising better security measures. They'd get cameras. They'd get a guard. They'd do better. Michael waited until Lily was in her car and safely on her way home before he climbed into his truck. His arm throbbed in time with his heartbeat, and exhaustion was settling into his bones like sediment. He sat in the parking lot for a long moment, staring at the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. His phone buzzed. Claire. "Dad, where are you? It's midnight." He texted back with one hand. "On my way. Sorry. Got held up." "Are you okay?" The question made him pause. Was he okay? He'd just fought 3 men in a parking lot. He'd bled on concrete and resurrected a name he'd buried. He'd faced down the kind of violence he thought he'd left behind and found out that it still lived in him, dormant, but not dead. "Yeah," he typed. "I'm okay." He wasn't sure if it was true. The drive home took 15 minutes. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better days, but it was clean and safe, and it was theirs. Claire was waiting by the door when he came in, still wearing her pajamas, her textbook open on the couch. She took one look at his arm and went pale. Dad, what happened?" "It's nothing," Michael said automatically, then stopped himself. Claire was 16, not 6. She deserved better than nothing. "There was a situation at the store. Some guys were bothering the cashier. I helped." "You helped?" Claire's voice was flat. She walked over and gently lifted his arm, examining the bandage. "This is not nothing. Did you go to the hospital?" "Paramedics looked at it. It's fine." "Dad." She looked up at him, and he saw fear there. Real fear. The kind that said she was old enough now to understand that the world could take people away from you, that fathers weren't invincible. You could have been killed. "I wasn't," Michael said. He pulled her into a hug, careful of his injured arm. "I promise I'm okay. The girl, Lily, she needed help. And I was there, that's all." But it wasn't all, and they both knew it. Claire pulled back and searched his face. "Is this about Aunt Sarah?" Michael felt his breath catch. They'd never talked about Sarah much, just that she'd been his friend when he was younger. just that she'd died, just that he missed her. But Claire was smart enough to see the connections he tried to hide. Maybe, he admitted. Yeah, maybe it is. They stood there in the small entryway of their small apartment, father and daughter, both of them trying to understand what it meant that some ghosts never left you, that some debts could never really be paid, that sometimes doing the right thing meant dragging your past into your present and hoping it didn't destroy your future. Go to bed, Michael said finally. You have that test tomorrow. So do you, Claire said. She was joking, trying to lighten the moment, but Michael heard the worry underneath, heard the question she wasn't asking. What if next time you don't come home? Get some sleep, he said. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. She hugged him again, tight and fierce, then disappeared into her bedroom. Michael stood in the living room, listening to the sounds of the building around him, footsteps above, traffic below, the hum of the refrigerator. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. The sounds of a life he'd built from the wreckage of the person he used to be. His arm throbbed. He went to the bathroom and rewrapped the bandage, watching blood seep through the white gauze. The scar on his other arm caught his attention, the one he'd gotten 20 years ago in a fight he barely remembered. 2 scars now. 2 reminders. One from when he was the monster. One from when he fought the monsters. He thought about Sarah, about finding out 3 days too late that she'd needed help, about carrying that guilt like a stone in his chest for 2 decades, about Lily's face when those men showed up, about the choice to stay when every smart instinct told him to leave. Michael Grant looked at himself in the mirror, at the tired man with gray in his beard and violence still written in his knuckles, and he thought about who he was, not who he'd been, not who he pretended to be, but who he actually was, under all the layers of time and distance and carefully constructed normalcy. He was a father. He was a man who'd done terrible things and spent 20 years trying to make up for them. He was someone who still knew how to hurt people, but who chose, every day, not to. He was Michael Grant, who bought milk and bread twice a week. And apparently, on Tuesday nights when young cashiers needed help, he was still a little bit of Kane. Maybe that wasn't the worst thing. Maybe some parts of who you used to be weren't meant to be buried completely. Maybe they were meant to be transformed, redirected, used for something better than what they were built for. The next morning, Michael woke up sore and stiff. His arm had bled through the bandage during the night, and he had to change it before Claire woke up. He made coffee, packed her lunch, and tried to pretend like everything was normal. Claire played along, talking about her test and her friends and weekend plans, but he caught her looking at his arm when she thought he wasn't paying attention. He dropped her at school, and then sat in his truck in the parking lot, trying to decide what to do with the rest of his day. He should go home. Rest. Let his arm heal. That would be the smart thing, the reasonable thing. Instead, he drove to Wilson's corner store. It was 10 in the morning, a different shift, a different cashier. But Patricia was there, the manager, doing inventory behind the counter. She looked up when Michael walked in, and her face transformed into something like gratitude mixed with relief. Mr. Grant, I was hoping you'd come by. I wanted to thank you again for last night. It's fine, Michael said. He felt awkward suddenly, uncertain what he was even doing here. It's not fine, Patricia said firmly. What you did. Most people would have walked away, would have called the police and let someone else handle it. But you stayed. You put yourself in danger for an employee you barely know. That's not nothing. Michael didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. Is Lily working today? Evening shift. She'll be in around 4. Patricia hesitated, then added, She called me this morning. Told me she'd never felt as safe as she did when you were there. That's worth more than you know. Michael left with his usual milk and bread, and something else he couldn't quite name. A feeling like maybe, for the first time in 20 years, he'd balanced one small piece of the scales. It wasn't redemption. He'd done too much for it to be that simple. But it was something. A step. A choice. He came back that evening at 6, when he knew Lily would be working. She looked up when he walked in and smiled, genuine and warm. "Hey, I was hoping I'd see you." "Needed milk," Michael said, which was a lie. He'd bought milk that morning, but she didn't call him on it. "How's your arm?" "Fine. Healing." They stood there in that awkward space where gratitude meets embarrassment, where both of them knew what had happened, but neither quite knew how to talk about it. Finally, Lily said, "I want to pay you back for what you did. I don't have much, but I could." "Don't," Michael interrupted gently. "You don't owe me anything." "I owe you everything," Lily said. Her eyes were bright with emotion. "Those men, they were going to hurt me. I know they were. And you stopped them. You got hurt, stopping them." Michael thought about how to explain it, about Sarah and guilt and 20 years of trying to make up for one terrible night, about how helping Lily wasn't really about Lily at all, but about the girl he couldn't help, and the man he used to be, and the father he was trying to teach his daughter to respect. But all of that was too complicated, too heavy for a Tuesday evening in a convenience store. "I was there," he said finally. "That's all. I was there, and I could help, so I did." Lily studied him for a long moment. "You're a good person," she said. Michael wanted to laugh at that, at the idea that someone who'd broken bones and drawn blood and terrorized neighborhoods could be called good. But he also understood what she meant, that maybe being good wasn't about never doing bad things. Maybe it was about what you chose to do when it mattered, about who you decided to be in the moments when no one was watching and nothing was forcing your hand. "I'm trying," he said. And it was the most honest thing he'd said in years. He bought his milk that he didn't need and went home to Claire, who had aced her history test and wanted to celebrate with pizza. They ate dinner on their second-hand couch, watching some show Claire liked that Michael couldn't follow, and for a little while he let himself believe that this was enough. This small life, this quiet existence, this second chance he'd never thought he deserved. His phone buzzed later that night, an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Grant?" A male voice, official sounding. "This is Officer Martinez. We spoke last night at the store." Michael's stomach tightened. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing wrong. I wanted to let you know we picked up those 3 men this afternoon. Turns out they had outstanding warrants. The one who cut you has prior assaults. He's going away for a while." "Okay," Michael said. He waited for there to be more, for the other shoe to drop. "I also wanted to say," Martinez paused, "I looked you up. Your name. Your record from back east. I know who you used to be." There it was. The past, rising up like it always did. "That was 20 years ago," Michael said quietly. "I know. And I see you've been clean since then. No arrests, no incidents. You've built a good life here." Another pause. "What you did last night, stepping in like that, it took guts, took character. I just wanted you to know that people notice when someone does the right thing, especially someone who didn't have to." Michael didn't trust himself to speak. He managed a rough "thank you" and ended the call. He sat in the dark living room long after Claire had gone to bed, thinking about what the officer had said, about being noticed, about doing the right thing, about how the person you used to be didn't have to be the person you were forever. The weeks that followed were quiet. Michael fell back into his routine: work, groceries, parenting. His arm healed, leaving a thin white scar that matched the older one. He stopped by Wilson's corner store twice a week like always, And sometimes Lily was working, and sometimes she wasn't. But either way, he felt better knowing she was safe. Claire asked him one night, about a month after it happened, if he regretted it. Getting involved, getting hurt. "No," Michael said without hesitation. "I don't. Even though you could have been killed. Even though." Why? Michael thought about how to answer that, about Sarah's face and the weight of guilt, and the way violence could be transformed into protection if you were careful, if you were intentional, if you remembered that the point wasn't the fight itself, but what you were fighting for. "Because some things are worth the risk," he said finally. "Some people are worth protecting. And sometimes, the best thing you can do with a bad past is use it to make sure someone else has a better future." Claire nodded like she understood, even though he knew she probably didn't. Not completely. But maybe someday she would. Maybe someday she'd face her own choice between walking away and standing up, between safety and doing what's right. And she'd remember her father and the night he came home bleeding because he chose to stay. That was enough. That had to be enough. Michael Grant, who used to be Kane, who used to be someone's nightmare, stood at his kitchen window and looked out at the city lights, stretching into the distance. Somewhere out there, people were being hurt, and people were hurting others, and the world kept spinning in its complicated, messy way. He couldn't fix all of it, couldn't undo what he'd done, or save everyone who needed saving. But he'd saved one. One girl on one night because he happened to be there, and he chose to stay. And maybe, if he was lucky, that one choice would ripple outward in ways he'd never see. Maybe Lily would help someone else someday. Maybe Claire would learn that courage wasn't about never being afraid, but about acting despite the fear. Maybe the ghosts that followed him would finally rest. Michael closed his eyes and thought about Sarah, about the girl he couldn't save 20 years ago. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the dark. "I'm sorry I wasn't there. But I'm here now. I'm trying to be here now." The city didn't answer. The ghosts didn't speak. But somewhere inside him, in a place that had been cold and tight for 2 decades, something loosened. Something shifted. Not forgiveness, exactly. But maybe the beginning of it. Maybe the start of learning to live with who he'd been while becoming who he wanted to be. Outside his window, the world kept turning. Inside his apartment, his daughter slept safely. And Michael Grant, former monster, current father, occasional hero, finally let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, it was enough.